We will begin Agut Chodesh. Welcome everybody to the second session of Who is Moshiach, or as we call it, Electing Moshiach. We are very excited for everybody to be with us tonight for this important evening. Everything that we will be discussing over here is the foundation, not just of Yiddishkeit and everything in general, but specifically where we are holding today. Before we begin, I just want to say that tonight's session is in Schus, and it should bring a complete refuah shlema for Chaim Shneir Zalman Yehuda ben Hinda Yecheved, Chaim Mushka bas Shifra Chana, Shira Malka bas Esther Chaya, and Tina Kalevi ben Dvor Aleya. We really appreciate everyone taking their time for this important evening. This is the second part, part two. What we're going to be primarily focusing on tonight is what's very timely and important, the concept of restoring Malchus Beis David. Restoring Malchus Beis David is something that the world needs, and is something that the Rebbe has told us as we are getting closer to the Geula is of utmost importance. We know that the idea of accepting Melech HaMashiach and the idea of Malchus Beis David in general is something that is founded very strongly in Yiddishkeit, and it is something that we are really have to pay attention to, because it's not just something that is foreign, but it's something that we have to live with every day, and especially today. From Hosea, where it begins, to the Mefarshim, Rashi, Barbanel, Metzudas David explain about this and speak about this. We have over here a little bit of a flyer that I'm trying to share in the back end. But we're going to hear about this and much more from our speakers tonight. We're going to be hearing from each one of the speakers for about 15 minutes, followed by questions and answers. Any chat is going to be only to the host. So feel free to send in any questions, and we will try to get to them at the end. We hope that everybody is going to be able to stay for the remainder of the evening. Everything that we're discussing tonight is, of course, vital. So I want to get straight into it. We're going to begin with our first speaker, world-renowned speaker, Rabbi Herschel Greenberg from Buffalo, the Rebbe Shliach in Buffalo, director of the Jewish Discovery Center, author of many books on Torah, Gemara, Halacha, etc. He's going to speak primarily on the history of Jewish kings, and the idea of the Am, the nation, appointing the Melech, appointing the king. Rabbi Greenberg, please.
Unmute. Thank you very much, Yashikayach, and it's indeed a privilege to be able to do whatever we can do to hasten the Geula, Hamitas Vashlema, especially in these days, today being Rosh Chodesh, Menachem Av, we certainly can do with Menachem Av in the fullest sense of the word. Before I speak, rabbis like to say a few words before they speak. So before I talk about briefly the history of a monarchy in Judaism, I just want to talk a little bit about the whole concept of the monarchy is a little bit strange to the modern mind. Having a king rule over you is an anachronism to many people. It's something that we thought was long outdated and no longer a relevant form of government. So why would we want a king to rule over us? But you know what? Winston Churchill has quoted someone who said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the other forms. So democracy itself is not the panacea, it's not the best form of government, it's just the best form of government we have today. Because in a democracy, you have to assume that the people who are voting know what they're voting about, for whom they're voting and why they're voting. And also in a democracy, usually a more vocal and militant minority seems to be able to take over. And we're seeing some of that happening today before our very eyes, how militant minorities are controlling things. So what is the ideal form of government? So the truth is, the monarchy, the way people look at a monarchy is of course not the right form of government. We're talking about the ideal monarchy. And what is the ideal monarchy? The Melech, the king, is someone who enjoys two different selections. Number one, he's selected by God. So he has certain inherent powers of leadership, of malchus, of royalty. And whether or not he exercises those powers, he is inherently and essentially a regal figure, someone who has this exalted nature because of his closeness to God. A monarch who is not exhibiting that closeness to God is a failure as a monarch, but a true monarch is someone who has that chosen status, but at the same time, the people have to be the ones to accept that person as a monarch. A monarch is not supposed to be a dictator. He is someone who is chosen by the people. Now, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu, Maimonides says, was the first king we had, but it wasn't easy. God had to take a full week in order to elicit the regal, the royal, the powers that Moshe Rabbeinu had as a leader. It took God a full week because Chassidus teaches us that the power of Malchus, the attribute of Malchus that we have in our soul, is the most deeply embedded faculty that we have. And it takes tremendous effort to elicit, to reveal, to expose, to actualize that potential. So Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen by God, but it wasn't enough. He had to have the strong emphasis and inspiration to bring out that power. Now, when we elicit the power of a melech, of a king, and that happens through the nation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, but then there's a reciprocal motion. The king, after we accept him as our king, he ignites the spark of royalty in all of us. So when we talk about Moshiach as a king, we're talking about someone who we declare as king. Yes, he's chosen by God, first of all. We declare him as king. But once he has that position and activates and actualizes his royal status, he awakens within us our royalty. And what is royalty? Royalty is total control over our mind, over our feelings, over our actions. You know, our century, the past century, witnessed the most evil person in all of human history. And what did he do? One evil person galvanized an entire nation to commit the most atrocious genocidal actions. How much more so we have to believe that one person, the holiest person that ever lived, will be capable of igniting a spark within all of us and bring us into the era of Geula, of redemption. So let me talk a little bit about the history of a king, the halachic status of a king. In the Torah, in Deuteronomy, there's a clear, explicit commandment that when you enter into the land of Israel, Seim tasim alecha melech, you shall appoint upon yourself a king. Now, one could perhaps read the text in a way that it's not an outright commandment, it's a license, a permission given, but the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin makes it very clear that when the Jewish people entered into the promised land, into Eretz Yisrael, they were given 3 mitzvahs. Now, of course, they had many more than 3, but these were 3 primary, essential, communal mitzvahs. One was to appoint a king. That was the first. The second was to eliminate the greatest threat to their existence from the wicked nation Amalek. And the third was to build the Beis Hamikdash. These were the 3 primary obligations the Jews had. And one could suggest that all the other mitzvahs that relate to the land of Israel revolve around these 3. But that's for another discussion. So we have an explicit statement in the Talmud that the position of monarchy is not an option, it's not a license, that it's permissible. It is an outright obligation. The Jews were obligated to have a king. And that raises a question. The question is raised by Maimonides himself. Why is it that in the book of Shmuel, the book of Samuel, we're told that when the people asked for a king, Shmuel was extremely upset that they despised him. And God said they didn't just despise you, they despised me as well. Why was Shmuel upset? Why was God upset if that is a commandment? There are many ways of answering. I'm just going to share a few. Maimonides himself gives an answer, and he says that they had a justification to ask for a king, but they asked for a king for the wrong reasons. They asked for a king because they wanted to be like all the other nations around them. They wanted a figurehead who can lead them in war. They were not interested in a king to establish a country, a land under the direction of Hashem, under the direction of the Almighty. The other commentators say that, yes, monarchy was the right thing, but it was premature. After all, from the time they conquered the land until the first king, over 300 years passed. So it shows that if a king was a necessity, it could have been done earlier. But it seems that it had to be the right time and the right situation for the monarchy. It was premature. A third reason given by the Kli Yakar, they wanted a king not to subjugate themselves to the king. They wanted a king to be together with them. They actually, the expression they used was not the way the Torah puts it, Saim Tasim Alecha Melech, appoint a king on you. That means the king will rule you and you will have to follow his dictates. But they said, Sima Lanu Melech, appoint for us. The king was to serve them, and they did not show that they were willing to serve the king. In Hasidic thought, there's another answer given that probably explains better some of the other answers, especially Maimonides' answer. Generally speaking, a king is there for two reasons. Reason number one is to make sure there's order, there's no anarchy, that people don't swallow each other alive, as it says in Pirkei Avos and Ethics of the Fathers. So we want to have a king who will guarantee their safety and security for the inhabitants of the country. That's one reason. And another reason is to bring the people closer to God. By people surrendering their egos and their whole beings to the king, and the king himself has surrendered his ego, they were vicariously, through the king, actually surrendering themselves to God. The people did not want a king for those reasons. They didn't want it for the higher spiritual reasons. They wanted it for the very lowly reasons. And there are different levels of that itself. So what is the king's primary obligation? A king's primary obligation is to uplift the people and bring them closer to God. As I said before, the king, if he's the appropriate spiritual leader, if he uses his faculties and his powers properly, he will ignite the spark in every person, in every member of the community, that they too should live a higher level of existence in terms of their relationship with God. Now, as I mentioned before, a king is not someone who imposes himself on the people, at least not initially. Ein melech below am. There's a principle that is mentioned in medieval writings, and the Alter Rebbe brings it in his Tanya, that there's no such thing as a king without a nation. That means you can't be a king on your family. You can't be a king over your high-ranking officers. You need a nation. You need a distinct people, and they have to recognize you as the king and accept you and declare you as the king, not just in their minds, but it has to be expressed verbally, as we find in the Tanakh. People would say to the king, Yechi HaMelech, David, may the King David live forever. By saying that, you were declaring your allegiance to this king. Now, what's interesting, what we find is that King David was anointed by the prophet Samuel, and yet he didn't function as a king. Shaul, King Saul, who had anointed a few years earlier, was still practicing as a king, acting as a king. King David was not yet functioning as a king, even though he was anointed by the prophet. What does that mean, to be anointed by the prophet? That means that God has sent the prophet, direct line to God, from God, to choose you, King David, as the king. And yet he wasn't the king. It took time before he was accepted, first by a few hundred of his own people, then by his own tribe, the tribe of Yehuda, and then finally by the whole entirety of the Jewish people, and he unified the entire people. So we see that royalty, even though it's divine, but because the whole concept of royalty is that it encompasses the entirety of the nation, and it doesn't encompass them by overwhelming them, it encompasses them by getting them to devote themselves totally to the ideals of this monarch. It has to be gradual, otherwise it's not natural. Otherwise, it's a miracle. And where do we find the idea that we have a role in appointing the king? One of the commandments in the Torah that I mentioned before is Saim Tasim Alecha Melech. You have to appoint a king. The chinuch, the authority that enumerates all the 613 commandments, says that that mitzvah applies even today. In what way does it apply? So he says that all the laws that pertain to a king apply today as well. That if there's a king, we have to treat him with respect, with reverence. And all the laws, that restrictions that a king has and the restrictions we have vis-a-vis the king are all in effect today. In other words, we still have a role. If we identify someone as a king, we have an obligation to treat him as a king. And we can't just say, well, let's wait for God to somehow send a prophet and declare someone to be the king. Yes, we know Eliyahu Hanavi comes before Moshiach, at least in one scenario, but it doesn't say that he tells you who Moshiach is. He just announces that Moshiach is coming. So it's possible that we know beforehand who Moshiach is, and we have to accept him. We have to adhere to the principles that apply to the appointment of a king, which the Chinuch says even applies today. Now, how do we apply this today? How are we supposed to find someone and declare that person to be the king? Now, in order to strengthen this question, Maimonides, when he talks about the laws of Mashiach, he starts off by saying that Mashiach is a king will arise, and one of the things that he'll do is to restore the Davidic dynasty. Well, that doesn't make sense if you take it at face value, because if he's a king, then he already restored it. He's already a king. So what does Maimonides mean when he says that he will be a king will arise, and he will restore, he will build the Beis Hamikdash, he will gather in all the Jews, and he will restore the Davidic dynasty. So the obvious understanding of that, and this is how some commentators explain, and it's based on the Rebbe's talks, is that it doesn't mean a king who has the legal status of a king initially. It's someone who exhibits the characteristics of a king. What are the characteristics of the king? So the Rambam himself, when he describes the characteristics of Mashiach, explains it's someone who is steeped in Torah, of course, someone who's a descendant of King David, someone who's steeped in Torah knowledge, someone who influences all the Jewish people. He's engaged in getting all the Jewish people to go in its path. He fights, he repairs the breaches, and he fights the wars. The wars are spiritual wars, or even sometimes they could be physical wars. He can fight them physically as King David, or some say it means that he fights them spiritually. At any rate, what the king that we're looking for is someone who exhibits leadership in a way that he has the power, it seems, of a king. If you see a great rabbi, a great tzaddik, no matter how great he is, but he stays by himself. He doesn't influence others. But if you have someone who can galvanize thousands and tens of thousands of people to send them on a mission to change the world, and he cares for every single Jew, and he even works on influencing non-Jews to keep their 7 Noahide commandments, then we see a leader who identifies himself as a leader and is starting to do the things that Mashiach has to do. So when we see someone like that, that obligates us to treat him the way we would treat a king, and to get him to become more and more active as a king. If you noticed on that handout, on that poster, it had a quote from the book of Hosea, one of the biblical books, which we quote actually every month. Every month, at the beginning of the month, when we see a new moon, we have a special prayer called Kiddush Levana, sanctifying the moon. The moon is a symbol of the Jewish people, but it's also the symbol of the leadership of King David and his descendants. In fact, when they declared the new moon, the Talmud says they had to send a signal that it was done because it had to be done secretly. And what was the signal? David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim. David, the king of Israel, lives and endures forever. So we see that the whole idea of sanctifying the moon is a expression of the renewal of the Davidic dynasty, of the coming of Mashiach. And we quote this verse in Hosea, which you have on your poster. And I'm going to just quote it again, afterward. Afterward means after the absence of a leader, of a king. the children of Israel will return, and they will seek out Hashem, their God, their God, and David, their king. In other words, we're going to be seeking out two things, God and King David. So Rashi explains, as you see over there, that the signs of redemption will not be shown to Israel until they return and seek all three things. What are the three things? God, the Beis Hamikdash, and King David. We need all of those three things. There's another midrash that tells us, and by the way, Rashi's words are based on the midrash, so they're much earlier than Rashi. But another midrash tells us that the reason why the Jews suffered in the days of King David is because they didn't demand the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So that even though they had King David, it was not enough. They needed all three. The Abarbanel says here, we see here how closely the kingdom of David is linked to the sovereignty of God, because Jews strengthened attachment to God by subjugating themselves to Davidic monarchy. In other words, they go hand in hand. By subjugating yourself, by surrendering yourself, giving yourself over to the leader, Davidic monarchy in this context means Moshiach, so that in the end of days, Jews will seek both the kingdom of God and that of King David, as the two are inseparable. And the Mitzudas, one of the other classic commentators, echoes the sentiments. They will also seek King Moshiach, who descends from King David. So when it says kingdom of David, it doesn't mean David, historic David. It means the David incarnated within Moshiach. And from him, they will present their request to Moshiach, and he will rule over them. So in other words, Moshiach must be and will be accepted by the nation. Now, it doesn't happen in one step. Just like King David was not accepted by everyone initially. In fact, he was opposed by many, but little by little, the people began to recognize his sovereignty and they became his subjects. And that was the beginning of the process that the Rambam says was the first Mashiach, King David, and that will lead us inexorably to the final Mashiach. Now, how do we show our acceptance of a king? Okay, we know there's a king, we identify the king, we seek him and we find him. So what do we do now? Do we have to do anything that's different than what we did in the past? And the answer is yes and no. The yes is, yes, there is something that we do. We verbalize, we vocalize our expression of acceptance of the king's power and the king's authority over us. And that is done in the traditional way by saying the words, Yechi HaMelech, may the king live long. And the Rebbe explained that, what does that mean when the person says Yechi HaMelech? I mean, it's just a saying? No, it's more than a saying, because since a king is not a king without a nation, whenever we say the words Yechi HaMelech, we proclaim the king as a king, we help to give life to the king. Not life, physical life only. We give him the life of a king. We have the key to that power. The nation has the key to the power. If we want Mashiach to reveal himself, yes, God can do it without us. The Gemara says that is a scenario that Mashiach can come even if we're all guilty and we're not righteous at all. Chas v'shalom, God forbid that Mashiach would come in spite of us. The Rebbe says that will never happen. Mashiach will come because of us. But when we declare our allegiance to Mashiach and we say Yechi HaMelech or any other saying, the Rebbe said when we cry out Ad Masai, we cry out to Hashem, how much longer do we have to endure this exile? That's our way of saying we don't want the exile, we want Mashiach to reveal himself. That's true if Mashiach would just be a king like any other righteous king. The nation has the power to actualize and elicit his power as a king. The Rebbe says it's much stronger with Mashiach. The dependence on the nation is much more pronounced when it comes to Mashiach. And why is that? Because there's a Hasidic teaching quoted by Rab Nachum of Chernobyl in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that every one of us has a spark of Mashiach in us. So when we declare Mashiach as our king, since we ourselves have a spark of Mashiach, that is what gives Mashiach the power to activate his own potential. Because as we said before, the potential of leadership, and especially of the ultimate leadership, is so deeply embedded. It's the most deep-rooted part of our soul. It needs tremendous amount of effort to reveal that, because Moshiach on his own is the most humble of people. And on his own, he would never want to be a leader, just like Moshe Rabbeinu would not want to be a leader. But it was through the people, but with regard to Mashiach, that will declare Yechi HaMelech. And in addition, and this I'll conclude, everything we do, every mitzvah we do, and we have to increase, every one mitzvah could be that one final mitzvah that tips the scales and brings us to this critical mass that we need to bring the Geula. Every mitzvah should be focused on, we're doing it in a way so that it finishes the process and we make this world a dwelling place for God, which is the very reason, the rationale for creation in the first place. And to that end, all of our mitzvahs are directed. We should focus on that, and together with the declaration that we want Mashiach to come and we don't want him to be delayed. And that itself is the strongest effort that we can do to bring about the Geula Shlema. May it be this very day, take it from Miyad Mamish, imminently.
Amen. Thank you very much, Rabbi Greenberg. We really appreciate that in depth and in detail history of not just Mashiach in general, but specifically where we see in the Nevi'im, in the prophets, and in the other Midrashim from Rashi and Abarbanel, etc., from the sources where we have the concept of the King Mashiach, the Melech HaMashiach. That flyer that we showed already twice, it's a beautiful flyer that was made recently in honor of 70 years of the Rebbe's leadership. It's available for everybody to get them. I think it's for purchase on the website welcomingmashiach.org. It's a beautiful flyer. It has the picture of the lion and it has the sources. We always have to go back to our sources. So it's good to have it on a beautiful flyer in front of us. We can hang it up in our homes, in our offices, or give it out to others for Miftzayim, for a nice way to publicize what's most important. I'll also make mention that on the side in the chat box, there is a few links that was posted, important links of different things associated with what we are speaking tonight, all different links from the website welcomingmashiach.org. So now that we got the history of the sources, it's time to move to the next step. The next step is, if we want the Melech HaMashiach, if we want the King Mashiach, we have to try to figure out, how do we know who it is? So the fundamental first way, of course, how we know who Melech HaMashiach is, we turn to the Rebbe and we look at what the Rebbe has told us. So I would like to ask Rabbi Gershon Aftzin, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Lubavitch, Cincinnati, who's well known for his devotion to the topics of Mashiach, compiled quite a few svarim on that itself. Everybody tonight is, all the speakers have in-depth knowledge in the areas of Mashiach. But I would like to ask Rabbi Aftzin to please share with us the Rebbe's position, if I can say, on how we know who Melech HaMashiach is. Rabbi Aftzin, please.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Turin. And really, I want to thank all the organizers for this wonderful event. This is really the third time that we're getting together, Rabbi Wolf, Rabbi Greenberg, and myself, as on this special Zoom. I'd like to thank the organizers. I also want to point out the fascinating thing to me is that you would think that the closer we were to the time that Rebbe actually said the Sichas about Moshiach, that's where the excitement about Moshiach would have been. 10 years later would be a little less. 25 years later would be dormant completely. And I'm seeing something in front of my eyes, which is contrary to that, turns it on its head. I know that 10 years ago, I was approached by a few women, mainly Mrs. Zahaba Okanov, and they had a campaign to get people ready for Mashiach. And we got a few people together in a few different cities. It was like, mamish, you were considered extreme if you were even talking about this topic. Today, you put out a thing online. We have over 100 people that are eagerly waiting to hear. And so many people text me that I hope this recording will be made public after. We can't make it specifically at this hour. We all want to hear about it. as time is going on, all of a sudden it's getting more real, not less. And the truth is that's because we're actually getting closer and not further. We are further from when the Rebbe said it, but closer to when it's actually going to happen. So to me, it's just a fascinating thing to observe and to see in front of our own eyes how the world is actually getting more ready, closer, more interested, and not less, because we're actually getting closer to Moshiach. I want to make sure to clarify from the beginning of my talk what exactly I'm going to talk about. I am not going to speak about how do we find Moshiach through the halachic perspective, going through the Rambam. We already spoke that in our previous classes. Rabbi Wolf went through in detail the Rambam and the steps and how do we find the simonim, the signs of someone to potentially be Moshiach. I want to address the elephant in the room, and that is, did the Rebbe actually say upon himself that I am Moshiach? Was that actually ever said? Did the Rebbe actually speak about himself in those terms? And does the Rebbe actually want us to actually be speaking of him in those terms and publicizing this fact? In other words, is what we are doing and talking about really something the Rebbe said, or is this something that Hasidim feel strongly about and we are doing it? Or is this really coming from the Rebbe himself? So I want to address that head on in clear words, and I want to put everything in the right perspective, because so many people come over to me and say, Rabbi Avtzin of Gershon, whatever the way they call me, and they say, when did the Rebbe become Moshiach? When did the Lubavitcher Rebbe all of a sudden become Moshiach? And I always smile and I tell them the Rebbe didn't become Moshiach. The Rebbe was born Moshiach. It just had to come out the same way a child grows up, but the Rebbe didn't become Moshiach. The Rebbe's neshama came down to this world as Moshiach. And I want to go through the growth of the Rebbe through the years. I don't know how many of you know, but there is a clear sikha of the Frierdiker Rebbe printed black and white, where the Frierdiker Rebbe says that in the year 1902, there was a terrible gzeira, there was a calamity that was supposed to come to Klal Yisrael from on high. And the tzaddikim were all worried what's going to be with Klal Yisrael at that time. It was going to be a terrible, terrible event that was going to take place. And right before Pesach, in the year Tafrei Samach Beis, an event happened and the calamity was averted. That's all the Frierdiker Rebbe says. Something happened right before Pesach in the year Tafrei Samach Beis, and the calamity was averted. In the Sikha, he doesn't say what happened. That's it. Mysterious. We all know what happened 4 days before Pesach, Tafrei Samach Beis. The neshama of Moshiach descended into the world on Yud Aleph Nisan of that year, and from its very beginning, the Rebbe started saving Klal Yisrael from tzoros. This was the neshama that was descended into the world to save Klal Yisrael, and its very descent in the world already prevented a gzeira. From the little bit that we know as the Rebbe as a child, we all have our childhood memories, listening to Bubby and Zaidi playing in the grass. Everyone has their own memories. The Rebbe records precious little about his childhood. What we do know is that the Rebbe said clearly to the president of the modern state of Israel that since I am a child, I've already been perceiving and dreaming in my mind the way the world is going to look in the times of Moshiach. I want you to think about this. Which child is thinking these stuff? Which kid is like sitting back on the couch and saying, I really would like to envision the world the way it's going to be when Moshiach comes? Definitely not a child in 1905, in the middle of, we're about to go through the world wars and things. What is going on? Because this is not a child that's dreaming about Moshiach. This is a child who has the neshama of Moshiach inside of him, pumping in his body. So automatically the brain of this child, the heart of this child, that's the vision that this child has. This child, on the day that he's born, his father gets telegrams from a Rebbe hundreds of miles away in Lubavitch saying, this child got to be raised very different. This is not a regular child. There's a whole list of telegrams and instructions how to raise this neshama that came down, because the Rebbe Rashab in Lubavitch knew what descended, and he pushed literally from the Rebbe as a young child, because the Rebbetzin was older than the Rebbe. We know that the Rebbe Rashab pushed the Friedrich Rebbe when the Rebbe was a little baby. We have to make a shidduch with Reb Leivik. We have to make a shidduch with Reb Leivik. As a matter of fact, right by the chasana of the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe sent a telegram to a chassid that he should go to the oil of the Rebbe Rashab in Rostov and say that the Rebbe's ratzon was neskayim. The shidduch happened. This didn't just happen to be a cousin, a distant cousin, a Schneerson married a distant cousin. This was the Rebbe Rashab saw the neshama come down and said, this is coming right back to the family. This is the Nasi of Dor HaShvi. I can go on and on, but let's fast forward. The Rebbe's chasana. All of a sudden, that's when the Friedrich Rebbe, once again, he makes this huge chasana. The Friedrich Rebbe is so poor, and he makes this huge wedding fit for a king. Not any other daughter of the Friedrich Rebbe had such a wedding. Why is that? How does he make such a wedding? What right? What was behind it? Well, we know the Sikha, the Rebbe asked the same question of how Avraham Avinu was able to spend all his money on a shidduch for his daughter, for his son Yitzchak. And the Rebbe says, when it's negea to the etzem, if this is who you are and this continues, you give it all you got. The Friedrich Rebbe knows that this is the Nasi of Dor HaShvi. The Friedrich Rebbe puts on the Streimel for the first time out of Lubavitch by the Rebbe's chasna. This is the sign that there's a new development, and the Nasi of Dor HaShvi, the Friedrich Rebbe himself, puts the gartel on the Rebbe as a sign. That's how the Rebbeim showed that this is the next Rebbe. This is it. Dor HaShvi is beginning, and the Rebbe is now part of the Friedrich Rebbe's family. And we know, we're going to fast forward because I don't want to go over my time. On Yud Shvat, Tovshin Yud Aleph, the Rebbe accepts the Nesius, and what does he say? He says, hello, I want to tell you, since Avraham Avinu started bringing the Shekhinah down here, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that made it happen. He brought the Shekhinah to this world on Matan Torah. The Rebbe says, I want to let you know the same thing is with Alter Rebbe's generation 1, and we are generation 7, and we are going to bring the Shekhinah. Anyone who reads that Maimer understands that this is not another generation and another Nasi. This is the final generation, and our Nasi is going to be the one to bring it down here. They say a story that the Brisker Rav in Yerushalayim, he got hold of this Maimer and he said, he told his Talmidim, this younger man meant that there is Moshiach. This younger man actually believes that he's Moshiach. He didn't say it in a positive way. But all I'm bringing out is that you read the Maimer, you don't have to be a big Hasidic genius to understand. All you have to do is be able to translate Hebrew words, and you see this younger man is letting the world, he's putting the world on notice. I am coming to conquer the world. I am going to bring the Shekhinah to this world. And what does the Rebbe do? He does exactly that. He sets up a whole system of bringing Yidden back to Torah, bringing Yidden back to mitzvahs. He sets up a whole army. He sets up whole bases. He literally is following the script of the Rambam step by step by step, all the while allowing us to realize that this is all about bringing the world ready for Moshiach. Now, we do know that everything has to come in stages. We have a plan, but sometimes the plan is not ready to be heard at the very beginning. So we have to make ourselves acceptable, and then we finally reveal to everybody, hello, this is what it's all about. This has been the way of Chassidim. There were Chassidim of the Baal Shem Tov, of the Alter Rebbe, that lived in villages and towns for years and years and years, and nobody knew that they were Chassidim. It took 10 years until they started teaching Chassidus without Chassidus, just slowly getting through to people, and finally they made the big unveiling and said, you think that this is coming from Shamayim? This is all the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. This is all the Torah of the Alter Rebbe, and that brought people closer and closer to Chassidus. The Rebbe slowly built it up. Now, the whole time, Chassidim understood what the Rebbe was doing, And there were those that actually referred clearly to the Rebbe as Moshiach. My Zayder and Meir Avtzon Olav Shalom. He was in Detroit since the early 50s, and he was telling people the Rebbe is Moshiach. When people said, how can he say that? This is crazy. Someone went to the Rebbe, Moshe Dubinsky, and said that the Shluchim in Detroit want you to explicitly tell Meir Avtzon to stop these Wilderei. And the Rebbe said, what should I do? He actually means it be'emes. So there were Chassidim throughout the years that were always referring to the Rebbe as Moshiach, but it was private. It wasn't public. The Rebbe did not allow the public campaign. And when Rabbi Volpes, wrote to the Rebbe, why is he so upset about the publicity as the Rebbe as Moshiach? Isn't it MS, and something that's MS you shouldn't be afraid to tell? The Rebbe said, not everything you say has to be MS, but not every MS has to be said. For example, the Rebbe wrote to him, is the first thing you're going to tell someone when you meet him, when he comes into a Beis Chabad, is that if you drive on Shabbos, you're Chiyuv Skila. You're going to get killed by Beis Din. It's true, that's the halacha. If you're Mechal Shabbos, you get killed. Is that the first thing you're going to tell somebody? No, so you have to get the person involved. So obviously the Rebbe was preparing us to, preparing the world, laying the groundwork for the great unveiling of what Lubavitch is all about. He told it to us on the first day, but the Rebbe was preparing the groundwork. And all of a sudden, we find that in the later years, especially after the Rebbe said, I'm giving it over to you, the job to bring Moshiach, especially from Chavches Nisan and on, something dramatically changes. The Rebbe starts referring, and not just referring in speech, in writing and in public siches that the Rebbe edits. The Rebbe starts referring to the Frierdiker Rebbe as Melech HaMashiach. You start reading the siches, and I can quote you, and I truly, truly encourage each and every one of you to get hold of the Sefer Psura Sagula, whether it's in Hebrew or in English. The English one was translated by our very own Rabbi Greenberg, actually. These are siches that the Rebbe edited all about Moshiach, and they say that when the Rebbe printed the Tanya, so Reb Zushimani, Reb Levi Yitzchak Barditchev said, how did he take such a great Eibishter and put it in such a small book? I say, how did we take the whole Moshiach and put it into the small book? But this book has the answers to all questions about Moshiach. I can quote to you, but I don't have the time. Literally, time and time and time, the Rebbe starts referring to the Frierdiker Rebbe as Moshiach. And people say, wow, that's a big change, that the Rebbe is referring to Nesiderenu, Moshiach Shebederenu, Moshiach Shebedur, Moshiach Tzidkenu. All of a sudden, this becomes the way the Rebbe refers to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And then on Tazria Mitzoira Tavshin and Aleph, the Rebbe lets loose another bomb. And the Rebbe says, you should know, the Rebbe uses the word, V'anan Chasidim, we should know a Gemara. What Gemara should all the Chasidim know? The Rebbe says, this Gemara, all Chasidim have to know. What Gemara do all Chasidim have to know? The Rebbe says that there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, that the Gemara says that the Talmidim of Shiloh they found a pasuk to prove that Shiloh is the name of Moshiach. The Talmidim of the Rosh Yeshiva Yanai found a pasuk to say that their Rebbe is Moshiach. The same as with the Rebbe Chanina. These were the three Gdolei Yisrael, the three Rebbes of the time. And the Talmidim were competing to find psukim to prove that their Rebbe is Moshiach. And the Rebbe says, we Hasidim do the same thing about our Rabbeim. Now, the fact that the Rebbe said it by Farbrengen allowed it to be put into the Sikha, the edited Sikha that went public is a bomb, That the Rebbe is saying that this is what Chassidim are looking to do. A Chassid, what's the job of a Chassid? He's finding psukim to show how his Rebbe is Moshiach. But that's all okay. The Rebbe is igniting, putting more oil, putting more gasoline, getting people excited. But the Rebbe still did not say that I am Moshiach. The Rebbe is putting all the hints out there. The Rebbe is allowing us to refer to him in that way. But did the Rebbe actually say, I am Moshiach? So people said, the Rebbe can't say that because the Melech has to be appointed by the people. But that's true. But that's not what happened. At a certain point, the Rebbe made sure to let us know that, no, I'm not just referring to the Frierdiker Rebbe. I know what you're thinking, and yes, it's me. When and where did the Rebbe actually say clear on himself, Rabbi Sai, Klal Yisrael, Adasa Hasidim, I want you to know that I'm Moshiach. Well, I'm going to read for you a sikha, and I strongly encourage, because there's nothing like facts. Facts don't move. It just doesn't. It doesn't move. It doesn't change. The Rebbe's words are emes, and they are forever. You could think we're crazy, but I want to tell you, a lot of people think we're crazy. But you know what? When you tell them it's true, but I'm just repeating the words of the Rebbe, it's a whole different thing. It's not like, oh, I made it up. I'm just telling you what the Rebbe says. If they think that it's too wild, that's a question on the Rebbe. It's not a question on the Chassid. The Rebbe, and this is page 194 in the B'sura Segula. It's a Sikha of Mishpatim Tavshin and Beis. It was a crazy week that week. That's when Russia and America decided to get together to make a treaty to disarm the nuclear warheads and to focus more on agriculture. And the Rebbe was very busy that week to ensure that it actually happened. You know, that this plan of making the world peace, of taking swords into plowshares, actually happened. And the Rebbe, by the end of that Farbrengen, says that we want Moshiach to come miyad mamish. That was a lashon that the Rebbe used very often. Moshiach should come immediately, right away. And all of a sudden, the Rebbe stopped. And the Rebbe says, I want you to know something about the word miyad. That the word miyad, Hasidim always used to say that miyad is connected to the Yom Tov of Shavuos, because Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah on Shavuos, Yisrael Baal Shem Tov passed away on Shavuos, and David HaMelech passed away on Shavuos. The word miyad. Here the Rebbe says the word miyad is the three eras of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life, and I'm going to use the lashon that Val Seder Akir Va'aleinu. The Rebbe says I'm going to spell out the word miyad into three levels, three stages of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. I'm going to go backwards. The Rebbe says Dalid is Doiv Ber. Doiv Ber means the Rebbe Rashab. That's when the Frierdiker Rebbe was alive in the lifetime of the Rebbe Rashab. The Yud of miyad is Yosef Yitzchak, is the Frierdiker Rebbe himself. And then the Rebbe says there's a mem left. Who's that mem? If you think about it, every child knows it. So, there's a Chermaged der Alte Rebbe. And you go through the Rebbe Rashab, der Frierdiker Rebbe. Who's the mem? So the Rebbe didn't even just say, I'll leave it to you, your imagination. The Rebbe didn't even say that it's Menachem, his name. The Rebbe says the mem that comes after Yosef Yitzchak and Doiv Ber is Moshiach Shemenachem Shmoy. Now, anyone that knows anything about the history of Chabad, who is that Menachem who the Rebbe refers to as Moshiach Shemenachem Shmoy, which is a direct link to Yosef Yitzchak and Doiv Ber? That is the Rebbe saying on himself, yes, I, Menachem, the Rebbe used that lashon when he said, I'm going to take down the Israeli government. I, Mem Shin, will take down the Israeli government at a certain point. But I, Menachem, who is Mashiach, that is me. And this is one of those clearest parts where the Rebbe didn't just encourage it on a porch. The Rebbe didn't just encourage it, in writing. That the Rebbe publicly publicized this fact that yes, anyone that wants to know who's Moshiach, his name is Menachem. He's a direct hemshich of Yosef Yitzchak, who's a direct hemshich of Doiv Ber. So therefore, this is what the Rebbe said. Any chassid who believes a word of the Rebbe knows that every word of the Rebbe is emes and everlasting, and it's our job to stand with that emes, be proud of that emes, and let the world know the truth that we all know, that we were zoiche, that our generation, the seventh generation, has a Nasi whose name is Menachem, who is Melech HaMoshiach.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Aftzin. It is amazing how in that short amount of time you were able to go through it from the beginning all the way literally through the history of it. It's pretty special. It's a lot. The proof that you brought in the end of the Sikha from Mishpatim, the proof that you brought at the end of the Sikha of Mishpatim was just pretty amazing. That's the proof that I like the best. Out of all the proofs, there's quite a few times the Rebbe says, Nasi Adar Mashiach, Sheber, there are different things. But this one, where you have the miyad, Doiv Ber, Yosef Yitzchak, and then the Rebbe doesn't even say Menachem. The Rebbe says Mashiach, Menachem Shmai, as you emphasize so clearly, is just as clear as it gets. I want to remind everybody that on the side we have the links where you can find lots of material, including what we're speaking about tonight. And I would highly suggest you can copy it and paste it on your own phone or computer, because as soon as the Zoom is over, the links all disappear together with the rest of the Zoom. So we'll post it again shortly, but I would suggest you take a moment to copy paste any of those links in the chat box. Once we have everything that we said, starting from what Rabbi Greenberg spoke about, the history, where we have this concept of King Moshiach, continuing to Rabbi Afton spoke about a great detail where the Rebbe himself, we see clearly, not just allows, but speaks how he is Moshiach. We are going to move along to Rabbi Reuven Wolf, a shliach in Los Angeles, the director of the Mayim Yisrael Center in Los Angeles, who over the past few years has been traveling around the world virtually and physically, spreading the imminent message of Mashiach, how it is here and it's now and it's so important, and how we see it in every aspect of the world. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Wolf if he could please share with us how this is relevant practically in our lives, how we could take this and bring it into actuality. And of course, the goal of it all is to bring about the complete revelation of the Rebbe as Melech HaMashiach. Rabbi Wolf, please.
Okay. Yasher Koyach, Yasher Koyach. After Rabbi Afton's words, it's so clear and so sharp and so vivid. I don't really, I feel like my words might, I don't want to say detract, but take away from that clarity. The clarity was so sharp, it's so clear, because, so what can I contribute? I'm trying to contribute a little bit the idea that this is happening Momata Lamaila as well, which means that the world itself is calling out that now is the time. The world is yelling and screaming, and everything, all of existence is thundering, literally thundering to each and every one of us and says, what are you waiting for? Let's make this happen. Now, whenever a message is coming from the world, it's not as clear as when it's coming from the purity from heaven, when it's coming from above. So I don't want to chas v'sholom take away anything from Rabbi Afton's sharpness and vividness by me patchkening a little bit with the cloudy, with the fog. But this is where I came to it today. So bear with me. I think a lot of people struggle with the darkness and struggle with the questions and struggle with. So I think it's important to appreciate that. Why now? I mean, this is information that we've had for 30 years. What's going on right now? You know, we all know, and I don't have to repeat, that this year has been a year of tremendous tribulation, and the world, like the Rebbe would say, shakultzach. And this time it's for real. The world is really, really shaking and quaking. And we've experienced, if you call it in Tafshin Pei, or as they say, 2020 has been a year that no one expected. Things are really going, topsy-turvy. The world is literally spinning out of control. And obviously I'm talking about Corona, which has not let go yet in terms of its ferocious grip that it gripped the entire world. I'm talking also about the national instability, the social unrest that's going on, which wasn't just mentally, it was actually perpetrated in a very physical way with all the rioting and the protests and all that. So these are massive, massive events, and we're forgetting, because before this whole Corona happened, there was all this anti-Semitism that was going on. There was the attacks in Crown Heights and the attacks in Jersey City, following Pittsburgh, we're dealing with a period of time that was very rough, if I can say, very, very rough. And Jews are scared. Jews are uncomfortable. We really don't know what to do. And I'm getting from all directions what should be done. Yidden or Yidden. See, as Jews, we all recognize that when something is happening, the root of it is spiritual. And when we need to fix something, we have to do a spiritual repair, not just a physical repair. It's not just about making sure you're healthy and social distance and wash your hands and take a lot of zinc and boost your immune system and do whatever we can to get our schools back open so kids can go to school. Of course, all these things we have to do, because we live in the world, and we have to take precautions and be healthy and do what we need to do, our shtadlus. That is, of course, but as Yidden, we're all aware that the Iker, when we see such unrest, that there's a spiritual element over here. So I've been getting calls from my community, from people like one person was trying to reach out to me for a while, if I will join in the call that because people are wearing masks and they're covering their mouth, that means that we have to be more careful in what we speak. And therefore, we should take upon ourselves a certain hour in the day that we watch what we're talking. And that's that's beautiful. It's for sure. I mean, a Yid has to be careful with what we talk. And this is definitely a sign that everybody's covering our mouth. We have to improve in that. People have been saying we have to stop talking by davening. Our shuls, since they shut down the shuls, we need to make sure that when we go back to shul, that we don't talk during davening. Of course. And then people were saying that because the weddings have been, over the top, and people were going into debt and so on and so forth, so we should cut down on the weddings, make them a little more modest, so people, right? Yeah, agree with that. And so many other types of it. And the general notion is that tshuva, utfila, utzedakah, mavirin esraya hagazera. That has been always the response of Judaism to every bad gezerah that's happening. But my question over here is this really the message? Is it really a time when there is a bad gezerah? And mavirin, if the situation is calling for mavirin esraya hagazera, or perhaps it's a different story now. We're dealing with migoila legeula, from exile to redemption, not removing a decree so that life in exile, our previous life should continue, but rather perhaps what we're being prodded to from above. Not everybody listening to this are sworn tonight. I don't know, are sworn Chabad Hasidim and gung ho already programmed to Moshiach and fully devoted. I don't know who the audience is. I suspect that there might be people that are just out there listening in, trying to make sense of the world, of what's going on. See, to a Chabad Chassan, I think it's very clear. If the Rebbe said in 1990 that Igiyas Mangulaschem is Igiyas Mangulaschem, then that's the end of it. The time of redemption has come, and therefore, time of redemption has come. I'm talking about people that might be on the side saying, how do we know this? Maybe not exactly. Maybe Golos is still going on, and Mashiach will come, and Mashiach will come. I think there is perhaps just a thought in, if we try to analyze the occurrences of the last year. I mean, of course, it's the primary fundamental call that we have to do away with exile and transition to Geula is obviously the fact that we have a clear nevuah and a prophecy that the Hine Mashiach ba, that Mashiach is about to come, and Igiyas Man Gulas. I don't have any other convincing argument as strong as the word of a Navi, and that has to obviously be the fundamental basis. What I am saying is that also from a more rational kind of a thinking, I think it becomes pretty clear in terms of, if this was just about the Eibishter calling the Jewish people to improve in various different observances that we should improve, then I think three things. Number one, why is it so global? Does anybody remember such events that are hitting the entire world, literally everywhere? No matter where you go across all the continents, you'll find people masked, faces masked. And that is so insane. That is so not normal. Everybody is worried about the same thing, about this corona, about this illness, about the sickness. And then that's number one, the fact that it is so global, it's so powerful. If Hashem wants us just to not, as Yidden, we should be more careful with Shmiras Haloshen or something like that. It's like, I used to hear on the news, on the radio, there used to be someone who would say a Chinese proverb, if your friend has a fly on the head, don't take a hatchet to remove the fly. The most you do is take a fly swapper or a little napkin. The fact that the Eibishter took out this hatchet and banged and suddenly suspended the life as we know it for all of the entire world is definitely telling us in very clear words that that something big, something major is about to happen. Something needs to happen. The other idea is the fact that there are the consecutiveness, if we can call it the consecutive variations of big disruptive events. Meaning it's not just that there was COVID. It was that immediately after that, before we just barely beginning to get a grip, and cities like New York and the East Coast was beginning to kind of catch their breath, and suddenly the looting and the rioting that again gripped the entire nation in a way that we haven't seen. And again, it's not only in the United States that we see such civil unrest. It's in many places in the world, whether Hong Kong, whether Iran, whether there is a certain extremism that's picking up, and countries are being divided and being pitted against each other. It almost feels like we're at the brink of civil war, whether in the physical sense or at least politically. It's something that we've never seen. It's really that the world's a tinderbox. Just a tiny little spark and the whole thing can go up in flames. We're seeing this and we're witnessing. So again, it's the fact that it's so global. Number two is the consecutiveness of it. Number three, it's interesting. I think the most important part that's telling us that what the Eibishter wants of us now is a major shift in our direction. It's turning from Golus to Geula, and that our avodah has to be not just tightening the screws of our ordinary observance, but a paradigm shift, a focus in a whole different direction, or to say our trajectory has to be in a different direction. We're moving somewhere else. I think is because the fact that the disruption that happened this year was a disruption that affected. It brought our communal observance to a halt. It didn't stop Yiddishkeit, because if it's Moshiach, then it's not going to stop Yiddishkeit. Moshiach is not going to chas v'sholem interrupt the observance of a Jew. Moshiach is here to enhance the observance of Torah and mitzvahs, to increase limud Torah, to increase mitzvah observance. But if you think about it, mitzvah observance and Torah and all this was not diminished. In a sense, perhaps even increased through all the Zoom classes and so on and so forth. What was disrupted was our institutional system that we've been systemized. Now that, which means the schools, which means the shuls, which means the social life, all that came to an end. That element of Judaism is an institution that is set up in a way that is adapted in the time of Golus. What I mean by that is that the fact that our shul is the center of Judaism, of our communal life, that's not in the time of Geula. In the time of Geula, we have a Beis Hamikdash that's the center of Judaism. The fact that there is a rabbi and there is a community and the authority is from the rabbinic leaders, that too is something that happened with the time, primarily when after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, there was the institution of Yavne, the Chachamim. Now, of course, there was always the Chachamim and the Sanhedrin were always huge amongst the Jewish people. But there was a system as well of a melech, of a king, of a monarchy, and so on and so forth. That element completely dissolved, and we went just to the idea of a rabbinic authority over the Jewish people. That element kind of was weakened in the sense that you don't have the rabbis anymore teaching face-to-face in shul. You have, of course, we found ways to connect through shiurim and so on and so forth. But the institutionalized Judaism and the fact that there was no davening with minyan and it came to a complete suspension, I think is very, very telling. It's telling that what you have now and what you've been continuing now, okay, pause, take a step back. We need to shift. We need to change. Something else has to come into place. And I think the fact as well that the storm is not going away. You know, sometimes you have especially in the summer, you have the midday thunderstorms. The clouds come rolling, there's a couple of thunder and lightning, and there's a shower, and everybody gets wet, and then the sun is out again. This situation that's going on now is very stubborn. It's very stubborn. We thought we're over. Okay, the nastiness of the corona of the thing where it swept over our communities. Nebach, so many people died and so many were ill, and that kind of like went over. But the effects, especially the disruption that it has, is not going away because government rules and so on and so forth are not allowing it Maybe because the danger, I'm not getting into the political element behind it, medical and so on and so forth. But the fact is that those who thought that this will quickly pass and then we'll go back to business as usual. We're going to go back to normative Judaism as we've always had it, back to our shuls, back to our yeshivas. That, at least as it is till now, is not happening. By us in California, we thought we're going back. They canceled shuls again, and they're telling us that in fall there isn't any schools. The storm is lingering, and basically, again, this is just a thought. I am sharing what I'm feeling or what I'm sensing very deeply, and what makes sense to me is that the Eibishter is telling us all, don't forget about it. We're not going back because we're not meant to go back. We're meant to focus on a new focus. And what is the focus? The focus is now it's time to turn to Geulah. We have to turn to the redemption. We need to focus all of our energies as the Jewish people to bring about the coming of Moshiach. Now, what should we do to bring about the coming of Moshiach? Of course, there is the increase of Torah and mitzvahs. That always do another mitzvah to bring Moshiach. That's true. But more than the regular increase of Torah and mitzvahs, the Eibishter wants something. What does the Eibishter want? What is that, in a sense, quantum leap? What is that shift that should happen? I mean, we can argue and we can say, perhaps everybody should make aliyah. Perhaps Golus is telling us we've overwhelmed our stay in exile. We're also sensing all this anti-Semitism and so on. Maybe it's time. A lot of people are calling. Jews should make massive aliyah. It's time for us to all vacate all the countries that we're in and go to Eretz Yisrael. That's part of Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, the Yidden are going to live in Eretz Yisrael. There's kibbutz galuyos. Perhaps time has come that we should arm ourselves. The Jewish people should be strong. We should all have AK, whatever, and be ready. Because you know what? Time has come for Jews to take control over their safety instead of us being, as they said, sheep to the slaughter. Maybe we should become militarily strong, and there are those that are calling for that. Jews better arm themselves. You got to be strong, and so on and so forth. And that perhaps can also be messianic, because in a sense, Jews will no more be terrorized by the nations. That's part of the idea of Shibud Malchus. Maybe that is what Jews should be doing. I don't know, all kinds of other things. The problem with that is, from a halachic perspective, and this is something so fundamental, and I think to our conversation today, from a halachic perspective, and that's what we have to follow. When it comes to Mashiach, midrashic elements always take backstage compared to, it's not just one Mashiach, it's compared to everything in Judaism. Halacha is halacha. So in halacha, we have the Rambam, how the Rambam establishes the coming of Mashiach. Yes, the Rambam says there is going to be aliyah because Jews are going to return to Eretz Yisrael, so we can have restoration of Yovel. We need all Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. Yes, Jews are not going to be any more intimidated and persecuted by the nations. All these things are going to happen. But the Rambam precedes all of that and says that the nucleus, the power, the force that's going to drive all of that, the koyach behind that all is going to be Melech HaMashiach. And that's what Rabbi Greenberg had mentioned earlier, that the Rambam emphasizes Yamoid Melech, a king is going to rise. That king that's going to arise, that's going to be noted as a king, accepted as a king, and have power over the Jewish people as a monarch, that Melech is going to do what? He is going to bring about, he is going to be the one who's going to build the Beis HaMikdash. He is going to be the one who's the Yekabetz Nidchei Yisrael. Which means that the primary order, and the Rebbe emphasized this many times, that if the Rebbe was vehemently against the idea that the return to Israel and Zionism and the war of independence and what we call Medinat Yisrael is chas v'shalom. The Rebbe chas v'shalom completely rejected the idea that that's reishis tzmichas geulaseinu, and the Rebbe's argument was that that's not being done through Melech HaMoshiach. The Rambam's clear that the return, the restoration of the Jewish people to the land and the building of the Beis HaMikdash is something that is driven and brought about through the Melech. So the first thing that needs to happen is the acceptance of the Jewish people of the Melech. So when we are standing today's days at such a crossroad, at such a crisis, where the world is shaking, and as mentioned earlier, we cannot go back, and it seems like Milmaila, they're not letting us go back. And to add, I just want to say before I would like to address, I know I might be taking a few extra moments more than my time, but before I get into actually what should be done, again, to emphasize how important that we do it, and we do it now, and we don't have any time, we're running out of time. You see, one of the things that the Rebbe told us, that in a sense, the Rebbe said already, Moshiach was downloaded. The Geula has been already downloaded. And now it's just going to take effect. The Rebbe says the Inyanim of Moshiach are already part of the world. It's going to start happening. The Rebbe pointed to various different things that are going to, that are happening as a sign of Moshiach. The denuclearization, the Iraq, the defeat of the Iraq of Saddam Hussein, and so on and so forth. The fall of the previous Soviet Union. And after that, even in the years that we didn't hear the Rebbe speaking in the last 20, 25, 26, 27, 28 years that has been since Chav Zayin Adar, we've seen the entire Middle East completely change, transform. Israel has been emerging as a real superpower and as a super economy and becoming very, very powerful. Its enemies that have been around it have literally been dismantled in an incredible, miraculous way, if anybody really is paying attention to what's going on. New alliances with Eretz Yisrael in support of the Jewish people have been formed. All these are unbelievable miracles, which the Rebbe already said that you should know that the changes that are happening in the world are being impacted by Melech HaMoshiach. He's the one that's doing it. So in a sense, these events are part and expressive of the Geula that has been set into motion. But the Rebbe did say, for instance, one of the stunning things the Rebbe said is that when Mashiach will come, there will not be any more, we will not need any more the institution called Shoitrim. We will not need any more a police force. The world will be without the police. Now, when the Rebbe said it, that the governments, and why, and the Rebbe explained why, because when Mashiach will come, there will be an elimination of Yetzer Hara. Once we will not have any more Yetzer Hara, so what do you need police for? You need people to advise, to guide, and therefore Moshiach is going to be the greatest counselor, educator, teacher, and guide possible. And then, of course, all those that are inspired by Moshiach and by the teachings of Moshiach, and by the teachings of Torah, and so on and so forth, will be those that will spread Moshiach's advice and Moshiach's guidance. The Rebbe said to all of us that we should notify the world that the world should accept upon themselves the Shofet and the Navi of the generation. Fine. Suddenly we see this amazing thing happening, something that is absolutely frightening and shocking, is that the craziest idea suddenly emerged out of the BLM protests is that it first it sounded like total fanaticism of a few total lunatics that are calling for defunding the police. But it's amazing that it caught on, and politicians and people are crying for defunding the police. Now we know, chas v'shalom, you defund the police, you take every police officer off New York City, Chicago, and wherever else in Los Angeles, so forth. They'll be, after what we saw the riots, after we saw what was going on, after just look what happened in Chicago this weekend. I don't want to talk negative things in Florida, here, there, people murdered and killed. That would be devastating. So how can this thought even become part of normative thinking? The answer is the Rebbe said that that's where we are. It's Moshiach. The time of Moshiach is when we won't need police anymore. So since the Rebbe said it, and since that's the part of Moshiach's coming, that is actually happening in the world. But here is the problem. If the world, which means if society, implements or gets into this Moshiach state, but it's not connected or attached, at least in an open way, to the Pnimius. In other words, if we Chassidim, Jews, are not evoking Moshiach and bringing about the Hisgalus of Moshiach, but the world runs ahead of us into messianic type of living, but it's not, then it could be very scary and very dangerous, because you can't have that defunded police while people, when they're still Yetzer Hara, or when people don't have that clear inspiration. So on the one hand, we're seeing unbelievable signs of Geula, signs of Moshiach, but what I'm saying is it's like the baby needs to be born, but it's already the mother is already she's over the birth of Mashiach, which means the revelation of Mashiach's kingdom must happen already now, because the world is not waiting for us to wake up. The world is going there, but the world goes there without us being there. We're in trouble. I'll give you another example. Take Corona. What is Corona that's wreaking havoc on the world? What is it really? What is it really? Corona means coronation. Tafshin Pei arrived. It's time for the world to recognize the coronation of God by accepting the Melech HaMashiach. But if we're not declaring him, if we're shy, if we're uncomfortable, if we're whatever reason asleep and totally intimidated by doing it, so the world is going into coronation, but because it's not being facilitated in the proper channels, what are we seeing? We see a world gripped by something called Corona or COVID-19, which discussed many times, is also related very much to Malchus Beis David, but it's not in a positive, cohesive, godly, open way. It's what we call an alma discasia. It's in the concealed world, and from there it's present and not in the revealed open manner. So I believe that at this time the world is running ahead of us, and we need to start catching up. And the moment we catch up with it, all this will be turned into what it really is, and that is ach toiv v'chesed, and beauty and godliness and all the light of Yemei Mashiach. So, what exactly does constitute the avodah of accepting Moshiach? Well, as mentioned by Rabbi Afson earlier, how the Rebbe said clearly who he is, and that there is already a Melech Beis David, and the only thing that needs to be now is the hiskashrus between the people and the Melech. Based on what Rabbi Greenbaum has already mentioned earlier, that there's no such a thing as a king without a people. What that means is that now the time has come for the people to accept Melech HaMashiach. And it's interesting, and you can see it in the picture over there, that this avodah of the people accepting Melech HaMashiach is something that started already in 1990s and 1991, right after the Rebbe gave that bomb sichel, when the Rebbe cried, and the Rebbe cried out to us, and he said, I did whatever I can, and now I'm giving it over to you. The campaign started. It started slowly, but people dared to do things that till now everybody was afraid to do, and that is to openly and without hiding, in a very open, explicit way, declare publicly the Rebbe as Mashiach, and to accept upon themselves, in a way of a massive acceptance, the Rebbe's Malchus. And they started bringing, as you can see, women were bringing signatures. Men were doing signatures. And the amazing thing in this is undeniable. Every time these signatures were given to the Rebbe answered. There's a whole list of that. The Rebbe answered, Shuas Chen. I'm not saying exactly each time exactly these words. Vazman Garama, the time has come, and it should continue, and it should be B'Haisafa. And the Rebbe said, Goyrem Nachas Ruach. This is Goyrem. This causes great Nachas Ruach. The Rebbe was driving it. The Rebbe was encouraging it. And every Shabbos, if the momentum perhaps was not strong enough, the Rebbe poured kerosene on it to flare it up. And this was at a time when everybody knew, and when the word, it was out, and the Rebbe knew very well, it's out on the street, people saying Lubavitchers are declaring the Rebbe Mashiach, and there were those who were saying that it's very, very dangerous and it's going to hurt Chabad. Then why? The Rebbe knows how, let's just say, fanatical and how devoted his Hasidim are. Why in the world would he take literally kerosene when there's a fire burning, and instead of stuffing it out, every Shabbos he would continue throwing that on? Is a sign that the Rebbe clearly was in on it. Not in on it, but wanted it. But he couldn't say so explicitly, even though Rabbi Afson showed how he did say explicitly. But he couldn't say explicitly, Chevra, accept me as a Melech HaMashiach, do that, because that's something that the king cannot do. That's something that must come from the people. Ein Melech B'loi Am. The people need to evoke in the king the desire to be a Melech. That's the way it is, and there's no other way other than that. So what exactly could be and could we and should we do? So what we should do, number one, simply it means, now we use the acceptance of, the model of accepting a king. Obviously what Rabbi Greenberg said, the model that was done when the other kings, when they would cry out, Yechi HaMelech, that was their. But we can also use the idea of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, we have to coronate God. And the way we coronate God, number one, it's communal. It's not just private. And I would say Rosh Hashanah is both. It's a very private experience. Rosh Hashanah, everybody goes deep inside their own heart to find it within yourself, that from a deep, very deep place, your submission to Hashem's kingship. And number two, we do it communally. We do it together. Because Beroiv Am Hadras Melech, by a king, the king's relationship is, once he's a king, there is a very deep and essential bond between the king and every individual. But the establishment of the king, the power of the king, is that he's a king over many. So on Rosh Hashanah, we do it together. We blow, and we do it loud. We don't do it hiding under the table. Everybody, we blow a shofar. We announce to the whole world, the Eibishter is our king, Hashem Malach Yisrael, and we cry out in the way we do in Rosh Hashanah, Yechi HaMelech, which means the Eibishter should be a king. We know that the kingdom of Moshiach, like Rabbi Greenberg had mentioned earlier, that the kingdom of Moshiach is really facilitating God's kingship. Moshiach's kingdom is not an independent element of the Eibishter's kingship. It's one and the same. Moshiach is Hashem's channel through which Hashem's kingship manifests for Olam Hazeh Hagashmi, for the physical human being. The Rebbe explains how Moshiach's neshama is so inseparable from not just from a certain level of divinity, but Moshiach's neshama is rooted in the very essence of God, like all of our neshamas. As Rabbi Greenberg had said earlier, that each and every one of us has a spark of Moshiach. The deepest point of our neshama that is connected to Hashem, Moshiach is, he personifies that deep, essential etzem neshama as it is one with the Eibishter. So therefore, the idea of Rosh Hashanah, of accepting God as a king, very much reflects into the acceptance of Moshiach. So thereby, there has been circulation, many, and welcome Moshiach. I have to give it to the ladies, and this I'm going to say again and again, and I've said it many times. When it comes to Bias HaMashiach and Geula, it's going to be driven by the women. It says so clearly. The Rebbe emphasized it many times. Men sometimes have some egos and have a hard time letting the women lead, but I will say this openly, and all men listening, this is just the reality. The women are going to drive this, and we have to respect that. And we should be excited the fact that the hard work they are taking. And I have to shout out to those women that are relentlessly, because I sometimes I don't want to, it gets too hard, it gets too nonstop. We're going to do it, and we're going to see it through. So on the Welcome Mashiach Committee, there is, on their website, there is a acceptance. And then when you accept Mashiach, it needs to be done. Number one, it's something that is done verbally. It's something that the Rebbe encouraged it to be signed when people gave the Rebbe signatures. Now, where does that come from? It comes from the idea that when you accepted a Rebbe as a Rebbe, we would sign a Ksav Hiskashros, which means Chassidim would write, let's say the Rebbe was asked to be Rebbe, which means to be their leader. A Rebbe really means a king. That's why Chassidim always refer to the Rebbe. Even if we wouldn't say Mashiach, they would say to the Rebbe, Adonenu Moireinu V'Rabbeinu. Adonenu means our master, which is something which is used for the idea of royalty. So when we accept a Rebbe, it was always by people writing and signing their name. Anything serious you do in your life, until you don't put your signature, it doesn't have any value. You got to put your signature down. So I think it is very, very strong when people sign a declaration in which they accept. Many people listening today have done it already, and I can't tell you how many times this thing has to be done. But I think the campaign of pushing this to happen, and people should do this, and the more people is something. And I would also say that if this, I believe, needs to be mainstreamed. One of the ideas people will ask me all the time, they say, Rabbi Wolf, you're saying that we have to accept Mashiach and so on, but it has been done already and it didn't happen. Mashiach didn't come. Yes, it has been done, but it is viewed by the rest of the world that it's just an extreme, small, little fanatical part of Lubavitch that believes in this, but the rest of Lubavitch doesn't. That's not good. It's not a covet for the Melech. It has to be streamline. It has to become more and more mainstream. Now, are we going to wait till everybody acknowledges it, that everybody's part? That's not our cheshbon. If that needs to happen, it's going to happen. But we need to get the ball rolling. And that is that this needs to be something that is done. It is done b'kavadig. It is done in a strong. It is done in an elegant way, in a smart way. But anybody that can have a chelik and be part of the hafatza of spreading this and getting people to accept. Now, what does it mean to accept? Accept the melech means, number one, is that you're deeply surrendering yourself to the king. Number two, you're accepting upon yourself to follow his orders. That's what it is. So it's not just a joke. It's not, I'm signing something. It means I'm going to try to be the best devoted chassid and subject of Melech HaMashiach, which means that when Mashiach asks us to do things, let's say in the 9 days, the Rebbe asked us, certain things should be done. We should make siyumim. We should learn about Hilchos Beis Hamikdash. These are things that are not just suggestions. Once you're accepting upon yourself the Malchus of Mashiach, it's not a suggestion. It's something that becomes a decree that you have to do it. That's a deep commitment. But we do it joyfully because we know that's where our heart is. That's where our soul is. That we intrinsically want to have more to say, but I don't want to hold up the time. Maybe from the questions, we'll be able to what's it called again? Complete some of the thoughts. But this is I think a call of the hour that we all should get involved to some way and another in accepting for ourselves Melech HaMashiach, declaring it vocally, and also help spread it, help teach it, help other people come on board as well. And Be'ezus Hashem, the Karev Mamish, we will see the full Hisgalus of Melech HaMashiach.
Amen. L'chaim. Our Groisin Yasher Koyach, Rabbi Reuven Wolf from Los Angeles. Thank you so much. That's amazing. An amazing evening. From starting off with Rabbi Greenberg giving us the important history, starting in Yiddishkeit, where we see the concept not just of Mashiach, but Melech HaMashiach, continuing with Rabbi Afton, going through from the Rebbe's birth all the way through the years, how we see with accepting the Nesias in Tafshin Yud Aleph and through the Sichos of Nun Aleph and Nun Beis, how the Rebbe himself is clearly letting us know that he is Melech HaMashiach through Rabbi Reuven Wolf shared with us about the current events, how the world is schlepping us, like you said, the world is ahead of us, and we have to run after it. And the Ma'aseh B'Poyel that you're bringing about, the idea that we have to actually accept the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach as Melech HaMashiach, like we can do through the signatures, which happened also over the past quite some years. Like we saw that picture of the group of women bringing the signatures, and that is something that we have to do currently. So that is tremendous. It's a lot to take in. I'm trying to grasp it all myself. It's like throwing a bombshell at somebody, even for somebody that's a little bit familiar with it. I would say that I'm a little bit familiar with it, but still hearing it all from A to Z so clearly, it's a lot. But that's what we're here for. We're here to take it in. We're here to say l'chaim and to really be able together to make it happen. That's what it's all about. So we've completed the first section of the evening, and that is each one clearly sharing the different steps, bringing us to the process where we're holding now. We're about to move on to the final section of the evening, and that is the Q&A, the questions. Firstly, I'll just mention we have quite a few questions that came in. Feel free to continue sending them in. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get to all of them, but we're going to try to get to as many as we could. We're going to start that shortly. But I just want to take a moment now, once again, to mention that on the side, there are those links, very important links of resources, and not just resources, but practically where you can actually sign this Kabbalah Malchus, this acceptance of the Rebbe as Melech HaMashiach, and you can share it with others. But what I want to do for one moment is make the hachlat of the evening, so to speak, that we can all together make sure that this evening is not just an evening of inspiration, and from here we move on with our life, but it's an evening that stays with us, and we continue this every moment, and we push until the complete revelation. So as a hachlata, as a good resolution, the righteous woman, as Rabbi Wolf gave them credit where credit is due, the Welcome Mashiach Committee I'm not sure if I should mention names or not, but there's quite a few women, some of them from Los Angeles, that are really heart and soul is not even the words to say of how much they're putting themselves into this vital mission of making Mashiach happen. And right now, with the main focus being this acceptance of the Rebbe as Melech HaMashiach. So they have created a new WhatsApp group. So I'm sharing right now, I just shared it. Once again, I shared it earlier also. To follow up on this panel, everyone is encouraged to join in. It's an admin-only post, so there's not going to be conversations. It should be a couple times a week, short videos or audio, about twice a week, specifically connected with this idea that we're speaking of tonight, where we're holding and how now we have to accept the Rebbe as Melech HaMashiach. So everyone is highly encouraged to join the WhatsApp group. And once again, once the evening is over with our Zoom, you will not be able to hit the link anymore. So I would suggest you take a moment, whether it's from your phone or from your computer, at least just copy it so you have it. I will make mention of Mrs. Josefa Benkalter, I hope I pronounced that good enough, and Mrs. Rifki Katz, who really are the driving force behind this evening and much other Mashiach activities that are going on. So without further ado, we're going to go to the Q&A. We're going to do this for the next, Emir Hashem, about 22 minutes. So we hope everybody's able to hold on tight. We have a lot of questions. So we're going to ask Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Wolf, who will be addressing the questions. I'll say which question is for who, to please try to keep it concise. And the bell is going to go off after 120 seconds. So if you can keep it under 60 seconds, Matev Manayim. Otherwise, we will go up to 120 seconds. So we're going to start with you, Rabbi Greenberg. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit quick, but we will just try to cover as much ground as we could. So Rabbi Wolf just finished off. Almost his last words were, people are going to say, we did it already. Everything that we've spoken about has been done. And so Rabbi Wolf said, now our job is to see how we can get it to the world. But I want to ask that same question to you, Rabbi Greenberg, and see if either you have a different answer or you can, in 120 seconds, maybe say how we can bring this to the world. So what would you say to those that say, we have done this already? What's the answer, Rabbi Greenberg?
Obviously, we're not just bringing a slogan to the world. If it's a slogan, then you use conventional ways of getting people to follow a slogan. This is a very pneumistic thing. It's a very deep thing to accept someone as a melech. It touches your very core, and it's something that is unprecedented in terms of modern history. People don't have that deep acceptance of a melech. So in order for that to happen, to make it happen, of course, if you know people and you can explain to them what Mashiach is briefly, and they know what the Rebbe is, but I think that it's very important that we spread the knowledge of Mashiach, which many people are doing, what Mashiach exactly is, because most people, unfortunately, are not really aware. I know 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we spread the teachings of Mashiach, but there's a new generation, and we have to educate them. And the second thing is you have to educate people about the Rebbe. If a person will ask me, do you believe the Rebbe is Mashiach? My answer would be to this person who I don't know what you know about the Rebbe, and I don't know what you know about Mashiach. So it could be, if I'll tell you the Rebbe is Mashiach, it's going to be a whole warped idea of what Mashiach is. It's important. The Rebbe spoke about Eiris de Tehu, Bekalim de Tikkun, the light of Tehu, which is very powerful, but it has to be implemented within the vessels, an orderly, rational understanding so that people can relate to it. If we just come to people and overwhelm them, most people will not relate to that. So you have to explain to them what the Rebbe is, and the stories of the Rebbe blow their minds. I know when I tell stories of the Rebbe, it just blows people's minds. And then when you talk about Mashiach, they'll come to the conclusion that the Rebbe is Mashiach, and then you can talk to them about accepting the Rebbe as the Melech.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Greenberg. It's getting straight to the point. That's the way we like it. Rabbi Wolf, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to go a little bit off topic, but it's also an important question. How else can we work on Kabbalah Samalchus besides saying Yechi and signing the declaration? Is there another way that we're able to work on this concept of Kabbalah Samalchus?
So I will answer that when it comes to accepting the Eibishter, I used to use the example. We have the Memorim of the Alter Rebbe, where the Alter Rebbe talks about Chodesh Elul. And the Alter Rebbe says, when Melech Besada, the king goes out in the field. And what the Lashon over there is that Kol Ha'am Yotzeh, that the whole people go out, Lahagbul Pnei Panav Basada. Everybody goes out to greet. And it's interesting, there's the same words like the Rebbe used, Kabbalas Pnei Moshiach. But the Alter Rebbe is talking about going out to greet the king Basada regarding the Eibishter and Chodesh Elul. So what does it mean to be Makabel the Eibishter, the Chodesh Elul? So it's interesting. There's two. The Friediger Rebbe says it means Kabbalas Oil Malchus Shammai. What do you mean to go out to greet the Eibishter, to go greet Hashem and Chodesh Elul when the king is in the field? It means that the Eibishter's sovereignty and kingship you take it more seriously in your daily life every single day. So what that means to apply that to Moshiach, we all have a lot to work on when it comes to implementing what the Rebbe wants of us. The Rebbe, everybody knows personally, their circuit, their influence, their effect they can have. If they would, have to go into Yechidus tomorrow and show the Rebbe like their activity, how much they would prepare for it and think to themselves like, well, what am I doing? What am I telling I am going to do? So, and in addition to that, there is all the hayros, like I mentioned earlier, what we do in the 9 days, how we should behave, in Chodesh Elul, regarding Rosh Hashanah. There's all these hayros. And the nature of us is that there are certain things that fit more with our personality, certain things that fit less with our personality. So if our relationship is lacking the idea of Kabbalah Samalchus, we kind of, I'm not saying with a Rebbe you can pick and choose, but it sometimes is not as urgent that you submit. So even if you've signed the paper, the question is, how seriously are you taking that Malchus? And that's something that we can do every day and increasing and focusing more. And I would add one more idea. The Alter Rebbe says that it's not only, according to the Alter Rebbe, it's not just Kabbalah's Malchus, again, regarding to the Eibishter, doesn't only mean Kabbalah's Oil Malchus Shemayim, which is more a behavioral thing. The Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah, in his Maimer, it means that your entire desire is the king. You give yourself over to the king in a very deep way. You live for your king. That kind of Kabbalah Samalchus is so deep. And so you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's what it means with the Rebbe as well, is that there is an experience of a deep, deep desire, a desire for his Malchus to be revealed, the desire for you doing whatever you can as an expression or as a facilitator of that Malchus. That is huge work. That's huge work. So the work is, I would say, bekamos. Bekamos means quantitatively that it should fill all of our aspects of our life, machshava, dibur, and maisa. And also quantitatively, that you measure yourself daily. How much is my life about other stuff, or how much is it about Moshiach and the full revelation of Moshiach?
Thank you very much. Before we continue to the next question, I want to make mention, there is some people, quite a few people, Baruch Hashem, that are watching on YouTube live, so they don't see the chat. The website for all the resources is welcomingmashiach.org. Welcomingmashiach.org. Rabbi Greenberg, in 30 seconds, how would you say, what's the main universal clear message we should go out to the world with? I'm not talking about to other Chabadniks or Lubavitchers, to the world. What would you say? What's the main universal message?
Well, it's obvious that the message is that we are living in very, very strange times, very special times, as Rabbi Wolf pointed out, and that this is a clear indication that we have to be prepared. As the Rebbe said, we have to prepare ourselves and the whole world for Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach, for greeting Mashiach. That's the basic message the Rebbe gave us, and it never changed.
That's as clear as it gets. Thank you. So I'm going to read a question now that I do not necessarily agree with the question in and of itself, but this is for you, Rabbi Wolf. I'm just going to read it. How can you, excuse me, I can see how the Rebbe could have been presumed to be Mashiach, but how can he still be Mashiach of Vadai if he is no longer physically alive? He would need to be resurrected, right? That was the question. Try to keep it brief, Rabbi Wolf, but if you can please address that.
There is the objection that I addressed this very strongly in our last. We had a session regarding the first session. We discussed that, and I'm just going to briefly refer to that back. According to the Rambam, which is halacha, the Rambam says if Moshiach is killed, he's disqualified from being Moshiach. That means if he was defeated by his enemies. That means if he was defeated. The Rambam is very, very interesting. If the Rambam would have included that a person who is nostalgic passes away. Again, I'm not getting into now whether you hold Rebbe this passed away. To our physical eyes, yes, it looks like the Rebbe passed away. So if the Rambam would have disqualified Mashiach based on that, the Rambam was very careful with his words. Should have used one word, and that is in Yamos, the Yadua Shahud, that it's not him. Rambam does not say that, and the Rambam says only if he was killed. So the Cheskas Mashiach is not taken away by the idea that Gimel Tammuz happened. Okay, that's from a halachic perspective, and it's not just that we don't have any proof that it is. The fact that the Rambam does not use that word, and that word would have included Chas v'Shalom killed as well, and the Rambam chooses dafka to narrow it down to in Herag, is a clear indication that the Cheskas Mashiach does not go away by that. Number two, in Medrash it says clearly that the way Mashiach, and again, this is not halacha, but in Medrash it says clearly that the way Mashiach does come is that he's nigla, he's revealed, the nichse, he's concealed, the chayzer v'nigla, and he's revealed again. The Rebbe himself questions if the Rambam, in one of the ha'aras, I think in Chelik Tes, or Chelik Ches, I'm not exactly sure where that is with that ha'ara, but the Rebbe questions if this idea that Mashiach is revealed, concealed, and revealed again is something that the Rambam could agree with. And the Rebbe proves that since the Rambam held Bar Kochva was Mashiach, since Bar Kochva was a period of time that he was hidden. So the Rebbe clearly addresses that Mashiach, even after he reveals himself, does not necessarily stand in a state of revelation the entire time. Now, the Medrash does not say clearly that Mashiach Chas v'Shalom can pass away. That's not stated, but it does say that Mashiach is concealed.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Wolf. I will just say that firstly, we're not here to address that topic of the Rebbe being alive or not being alive physically, etc. But that's an important topic as the Rebbe as a Siyadar. But we'll leave that for a different night. But in the question, the person specifically used the words Mashiach Vadai. Now, I don't know if they were being precise or not, and it's not my place here to share my understanding or viewpoints. But Rabbi Wolf or Rabbi Greenberg, if what I'm about to say you disagree with, please speak up. But what I'm going to say is that my understanding is in Rambam, there is two stages in Melech HaMashiach. The first stage is what we call Cheskas Mashiach, and the second stage is what we call Mashiach Vadai. And our understanding is that the Rebbe has it fits the criteria for that first stage of Cheskas Mashiach. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not Vadai Mashiach, which in Hebrew means for sure Mashiach. But the halachic category of Mashiach Vadai, my understanding from the Rambam is only once the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt and Kibbutz Goliath takes place, etc. So I'm not sure if there was a diuk in the person's question or not, but I just wanted to make that clarification. All right, I don't hear any opposition. So next question, Rabbi Greenberg. The Rebbe has said that we have completed polishing the buttons. Is there any final event that you would say we could point to that marks the completion of the polishing the buttons?
The Rebbe said clearly we finished polishing the buttons.
No, I'm saying was there... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
But I'll just share a little anecdote. I went to buy a kapata a few years ago, and I was going to speak at the Kinnis HaShluchim, and I was just absorbed in thinking what I was going to talk about. So I'm walking out of the store, and the salesman says to me, "You should tighten the buttons." He meant on the kapata, and I thought that he was telling me what to talk about at the kelos. So I did speak.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the question. The person who wrote the question knows that we completed polishing the buttons. I don't know. I'm not aware of any.
But that's
an
why I'm
answer
saying.
to this.
That's what I'm saying. That's even after polishing the buttons, sometimes the buttons can get loose. So we have to tighten.
Right, but was there an event that the Rebbe ever alluded to that is the completion? I don't know, Russia falling or any event that you would say that was the buttons being polished?
No, the Rebbe said it before the Soviet Union collapsed, I believe. I don't remember the exact date, but what was left, the Rebbe made it clear that what was left was Kabbalas HaMalchus. The Rebbe talked about opening our eyes and Kabbalas HaMalchus. In other words, the Rebbe also said that we finished Avedus HaBirurim, the service of refining, elevating the sparks, which is a prerequisite for Mashiach. And supposedly, we always thought that after that is over, then we have the Geula. So the Rebbe says, yes, the Geula is right in front of us, but we have to internalize. The Rebbe used the expression to the chief rabbi of Israel, that the Geula is standing on the threshold. All we have to do is open the door and just drag it in. In other words, we already reached the point of Geula. The Geula is right in front of us, but the Eibishter is giving us an opportunity to make the last thrust by bringing it into our homes, which is the Eibishter's kindness to us that he could bring it without us. He wants us to do that last part. Let's hope that he won't have to do it in spite of us, but we'll do that last part.
Okay, I think this is going to be the final question of the night. This actually, I guess, came flying at me right after what I just said from a few places about that distinction I made between Cheskas Mashiach and Mashiach Vadai. So, by Wolf, I'm going to address the final question to you. It's written over here in a few ways, but one of the ways is Mashiach builds the Beis Hamikdash in its place. L'chayr, that's 770. I guess that's also connected to the Sikha Beis Rabbeinu Sheva Bavel. And in other words, some say that the Beis Hamikdash has already been built. Kibbutz Goliath already started. I'm familiar with Sichos where the Rebbe says Kibbutz Goliath started, and I'm definitely familiar with Sichos where the Rebbe says about 770 being the Mikdash Ma'at, Beis Rabbeinu Sheva Bavel. So would you say that, from your understanding, we can say that the halachic category of Mashiach Vadai has already began? This is going to be the final question, and then we shall, Yemir Hashem, wrap up with the complete Tiskalis well before we're done this.
Based on what you said earlier, once we had the Nevuah, once we had everything that Rebbe said to us, Mashiach Vadai is established to us Chassidim and as Mashiach Vadai because the Rebbe said so. So we don't need.
Meaning, you're not. Are you referring to the halachic standard?
From a halachic perspective, I looked in that Sikha quite a few times. It doesn't seem to me like the Rebbe is learning pshat in the Rambam to the fact to say that that's what the Rambam means lahalacha. To me, it appears like the Rebbe says that the derech remez. That the derech remez, you can say in the Rambam that b'mekoymai means in his place. So that is like, in a sense, the beginning of it. But to say that's the Pirush halachically in the Rambam, again, I don't see in the Sikha that the Rebbe said that. It looks like, from my view, and I've read that a few times, that the Rebbe is not learning it, that's simple pshat in Rambam, but rather that is could be learned more in a, I don't know exactly the words that Rebbe uses, not the derech remez, I don't have the Sikha in front of me right now, but more as a Yeshloimar Degeinian that you can say that supports the idea that there is a Beis Rabbeinu Sheba Bavel, which is the beginning of the Beis Hamikdash.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Rabbi Greenberg.
Yeah. When the Rambam establishes the criteria for Mashiach, and he divides it into two, Cheskas, presumed, and Vadai, the Rambam is giving us the bare minimum of what it takes to make someone presumed to be Mashiach. Because the Rambam is not saying nothing about miracles, nothing about Nevuah, about prophecy, doesn't even mention that Mashiach is a Navi, because even though he mentions that earlier in Hilchos Tshuva, it's not really relevant to identifying Mashiach that he has to be a Navi, because the minimum requirement is that he comes from the house of David, he's steeped in Torah, and so on and so forth. So when we identify the Rebbe as Mashiach, the Rebbe has met the maximum criteria, not the minimum, the maximum criteria, because the Rebbe has shown that he is a Navi, and the Rebbe made reference to that in the Sikh of Shoftim. And there's no question that the Rebbe's identity of Mashiach goes far beyond the minimum of the Rambam. So we have to, so as far as Hasidim, we know what the Rebbe is based on, of course, the limited amount we know, based on what the Rebbe himself revealed to us. By us, the Rebbe is Vadai Mashiach, but if you go by the criteria of the Rambam, the minimal criteria, yes, you're not Vadai until there's an actual Beis HaMikdash in the Har HaBayis itself.
Grace Yashikoyach, thank you for both of you clarifying that one point. There's been somebody commenting about the fact that there's many mitzvahs that bring closer to Geula, including Ahavas Yisrael. Nowadays, we have learning about the Beis HaMikdash, as the Rebbe said, during the 3 weeks, giving tzedakah, and many, many more. So, of course, this is vital and very important. And everything we're speaking about tonight is not taking away from that in the slightest. In fact, I wanted to mention this earlier, so thanks for the reminder, that everyone should please give tzedakah, which G'dayla tzedakah shemakareves Geula brings the Geula closer, and specifically connected to the names we mentioned in the beginning, who this evening is l'schus and for shleima for them, to give tzedakah for them. But what we're speaking about tonight is what's standing at the tipping point. We're holding there. That's it. This is what we've been waiting for all these years in Galus. We've been waiting for the complete escalas of the Rebbe as Melech HaMashiach. We have been doing our work for years and years in Galus. Not just that, but years and years in Dar HaShvi, and not just that, but years and years since the Rebbe has told us about Higi Azman Yulaskan, that the time of the Geula, the time of your redemption has arrived. And now we have to make sure that we focus completely on what the Rebbe wants from us, everything we spoke about here at great length with the accepting of the Rebbe as Melech HaMashiach. I want to mention again the website welcomingmashiach.org, where you can see the resources, you can sign the documents, you can share it with others. I'm going to encourage everybody once again to join the hachlata of joining that WhatsApp group. And the number I'm going to read for those that don't have the link, if you're following on YouTube or somewhere else, the number to save in your phone is 929-266-9680. Once again, 929-266-9680. Of course, I want to thank everybody, all of the participants. I want to thank the rabbis that joined, Rabbi Reuven Wolf, Rabbi Herschel Greenberg, Rabbi Gershon Aftzin, for taking from their time, from their keiches, to be able to elaborate to us and clarify to us in such clear words all of these important topics and issues. And the main thing is we should finish off the evening together with the Rebbe, Melech HaMashiach, with the complete escalas, by the Geula HaMitzvah V'Hashleima, it should be Teikef Umiyad Mamish, L'chaim, L'chaim, and we can all join in together and proclaim Yechi Adinenu, Meirenu V'Rabeinu, Melech HaMashiach, Le'elam Voed. Thank you all once again. L'chaim, a guten Chodesh and a guten Abend.